They only gave an old washing machine to the single mother, but inside was something that Rebecca Mitchell never imagined that accepting that old washing machine would change her life forever. She hesitated for a few seconds when her employer offered the old appliance, feeling her pride wounded by the charity disguised as a favor, but it was precisely while trying to clean that rusty machine that everything began. Her hands found something stuck to the inside of the drum that would make her head spin for months on end. The morning had started like every other in the small town of Newport, Rhode Island. Rebecca woke up at 5 in the morning, prepared a simple breakfast for herself and her 7-year-old daughter, Emily, and left home carrying her cleaning supplies in a worn cloth bag. The work as a house cleaner was all she had to support the two of them, and every penny counted in the tight budget. Mrs. Margaret Thompson was one of her oldest employers, a 72-year-old lady who lived alone in a spacious house in the town centre. The relationship between them had always been respectful, but distant, marked by the class difference that both knew well. That specific morning, however, something was different. The elderly woman seemed more talkative, watching Rebecca with an interest she hadn't shown in years. "Rebecca, I need to tell you something," said Mrs. Margaret, interrupting the steady rhythm of the broom. "I bought a new washing machine yesterday. That one out back isn't good for anything anymore. It's just taking up space." Rebecca stopped sweeping and looked in the indicated direction. The machine was indeed old, with rust marks and scratches that told of years of use. It didn't seem to be in working condition, but for someone who washed all her clothes by hand, anything would be a blessing. "Do you want me to take it to the junkyard?" she asked, trying to sound casual. No, I thought you might want it. For your house. Maybe it still works with some repairs." The silence stretched between them. Rebecca felt the heat rising to her face, torn between practical need and the embarrassment of accepting charity. She thought of Emily's clothes, which were becoming increasingly difficult to clean properly, with just soap and arm strength. "That's very generous of you, but—" "It's not generosity, girl. It's practicality. If you don't take it, it's going in the trash anyway. At least this way it can still be of some use." The direct way Mrs. Margaret spoke relieved some of the tension. She wasn't being treated as an object of pity, but as someone who could give new life to something discarded. Rebecca accepted with a nod, promising to pick up the machine at the end of the day. When she finished work, Mrs. Margaret helped her load the appliance onto Mr. Harold's cart, a neighbour who had offered to do the transport. The machine was heavy, heavier than it looked, and the two women needed the man's help to get it onto the cart. During the short trip to her house, Rebecca observed the object that was now hers more closely. The brand was faded, but it was still possible to read "A Mary Home" in worn letters. The model seemed to be from the 80s, perhaps older. There was a dent on the side and some stains that could be removed with patience and the right products. Emily was playing in the yard when they arrived. The girl's eyes widened when she saw the machine being unloaded. "Mommy, is it ours?" she asked with enthusiasm. "Yes, sweetheart. Mrs. Margaret gave it to us. Let's see if we can get it to work." Mr. Harold positioned the machine in the only available corner of the small yard, near the outdoor faucet. She thanked him for the favor with a fresh cup of coffee and was left alone with Emily to examine her new acquisition. "It looks like it needs a good cleaning," Emily commented, running her small hand over the dusty surface. "Exactly. Let's start there." Rebecca brought buckets with warm water, sponges and detergent. She started cleaning the outside, removing years of accumulated dirt. Emily helped her, scrubbing the parts she could reach with the seriousness of an adult. It was a moment of simple partnership between mother and daughter, working together with hope to improve their living conditions. When she opened the lid to clean the inside, Rebecca noticed the drum was dirtier than she imagined. There were remnants of dried soap and some dark stains that resisted the common sponge. She decided to use an old spatula to scrape off the more stuck-on grime. It was during this deeper cleaning that her spatula hit something that shouldn't be there, something that made a different noise, like crumpled paper. Rebecca stopped and looked closer, noticing an irregularity on the inner wall of the drum. "What is it, Mommy?" asked Emily, noticing the change in her mother's expression. "I'm not sure, sweetie. It seems like there's something stuck in here." Carefully, Rebecca used the tip of the spatula to feel what she had found. It was definitely paper, or some similar material, firmly glued to the inner metal surface. The glue or tape holding it had hardened with time, but was still resistant. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. Rebecca worked patiently for almost an hour to loosen whatever was hidden there. Emily grew tired of waiting and went to play with her dolls, leaving her mother focused on the mysterious task. When she finally managed to free the object, Rebecca discovered it was a thick plastic envelope, the kind used to protect important documents from moisture. Her hands trembled slightly as she held the package. It was sealed with adhesive tape yellowed by time but still intact. Through the semi-transparent plastic, folded papers were visible inside. Curiosity fought against respect for someone else's property. "Emily, come here," she called her daughter. The girl ran to her, interested in the discovery. "What is that, Mommy?" "It looks like papers someone hid in this machine. I don't know if we should open it." "But the machine is ours now, right? So what's inside is too." Emily's simple logic made sense, but Rebecca still hesitated. What if they were Mrs. Margaret's personal documents, or from other previous owners of the machine? The right thing would be to return them unopened. On the other hand, if someone had gone to the trouble of hiding those papers that way, perhaps there was an important reason. Maybe they were documents that shouldn't be lost. With this mental justification, Rebecca decided to open the envelope. The papers were well preserved inside the plastic. There were 3 different documents, all yellowed with age. The first one she picked up made her swallow hard. It was a birth certificate in the name of Dorothy Mitchell Henderson, born in 1923. The surname Mitchell was the same as her family's. "Mommy, do you know this person?" asked Emily, able to read the name on the paper. "Dorothy Mitchell?" Rebecca repeated the name slowly. "That was my grandmother's name, but she passed away when I was little. Why would her papers be here?" The second document was even more intriguing, a rural property deed dated 1945, listing Dorothy Mitchell Henderson as the owner of a 20-hectare plot of land in the countryside of Newport. The address mentioned was vaguely familiar, but Rebecca couldn't pinpoint exactly where it was. The third paper was a marriage certificate between Dorothy Mitchell Henderson and William Henderson, dated 1940. Rebecca knew the story of her grandparents' marriage, but had never seen the official documents. Her family had always been very poor, and old documents weren't preserved with care. "Why did Grandma hide these papers in a washing machine?" asked Emily with a child's natural curiosity. "I don't know, sweetheart. Maybe she didn't hide them. Maybe someone else put them away for her." Rebecca Mitchell sat on the backyard floor, the papers in her hands and thousands of questions in her head. Her grandmother had always been a simple woman, living in a small rented house and depending on family help to get by. The idea that she could have been a landowner seemed impossible. But there were the documents, with official stamps and signatures that looked authentic. The paper had the texture and color characteristic of genuine old documents. It didn't seem like a forgery. That night, after Emily fell asleep, Rebecca stayed in the small kitchen rereading the papers under the fluorescent light that occasionally flickered. She tried to remember the stories her mother told about the family, searching for clues that could explain this discovery. Her grandmother Dorothy had passed away when Rebecca was only 8. The memories were fragmented. A thin woman, always dressed in black, who made sweets to sell and helped look after the grandchildren when needed. There was never any mention of properties or family inheritance. Rebecca's mother, Grace Mitchell, had died in a car accident when Emily was only 2. Any knowledge about the family history had been lost with her. Rebecca felt orphaned of information about her own roots. The next morning, she decided to look for Mrs. Helen, an elderly neighbor who had been a friend of her grandmother. If anyone could clarify something about those documents, it would be her. Mrs. Helen lived 2 blocks away, in a single-story house that seemed to have stopped in time. "Good morning, Mrs. Helen. Do you have a moment to talk?" The 75-year-old woman received her in the small living room, offering coffee and homemade cookies. Rebecca carefully showed the documents, observing the neighbor's reaction. What she saw disturbed her. Mrs. Helen visibly paled, and her hands trembled as she held the papers. "Where did you get this?" she asked, her voice altered. "I found them hidden in a washing machine I was given. Do you recognize these documents?" "Young lady, you should keep this very well hidden, or better yet, you should throw it away." "Why? They are my grandmother's papers." "Precisely because of that." "Your grandmother had her reasons for not talking about these things." Mrs. Helen's strange reaction only intensified Rebecca's curiosity. It was clear the woman knew something, but wasn't willing to share. This suggested there really was an important story behind those documents. "Mrs. Helen, please. I'm an adult, and I can handle the truth. What happened to my grandmother?" "Some things are better left in the past, dear. Your grandmother built a new life, raised her family. Why stir up old pain?" "Because maybe that old pain explains why our family has always struggled. Maybe these papers mean something important." Mrs. Helen sighed deeply, clearly conflicted. She stood up and went to an old dresser from where she took out a yellowed photo album. She flipped through a few pages before showing a black and white photograph. "This is your grandmother at 20 in front of the house where she was born and raised." The photo showed a smiling young woman next to a large house surrounded by extensive grounds. It was very different from the humble woman Rebecca remembered. There was dignity and prosperity in the image that contrasted with the memories of poverty. What happened? Why did she lose all that? Life happened, child. Difficult decisions, opportunistic people, lack of knowledge about rights. Your grandmother was forced to choose between fighting for properties or caring for her small children. She chose family. But these documents prove the lands were legally hers. Paper is one thing, reality is another. Justice doesn't always favor the poor and unprotected. Rebecca left Mrs. Helen's house with more questions than answers. The neighbor clearly knew much more than she was willing to reveal, but the fragmented information was already enough to confirm that there was a significant story behind those documents. That afternoon, after work, Rebecca decided to visit the city's real estate registry office. If those documents were authentic, there should be official records proving the mentioned property. The clerk who assisted her was polite, but clearly uninterested. "What property would you like to inquire about?" he asked without looking up from his computer screen. Rebecca provided the address mentioned in the old deed. The man typed some information and waited for the system to process. His expression changed when the results appeared on the screen. "This property has a complex history, several owners over the years. It is currently registered in the name of a company." "A company? What kind of company?" "Horizon Real Estate Development, LLC. They purchased the land in 1978. "But how? These documents show that my grandmother was the owner." The clerk looked at her with a mix of pity and suspicion. "Ma'am, these papers you're showing may have historical value, but not necessarily legal value. A lot has changed since 1945. Laws, procedures, requirements. The fact that someone had a property document doesn't mean they maintained the rights to it. But how could my grandmother have lost a property that was hers? Overdue taxes, debts, forced sale, adverse possession. There are several possibilities. Without a detailed investigation of the historical records, it's impossible to know exactly what happened." Rebecca left the registry office feeling small and ignorant. The clerk was right about her lack of legal knowledge, but that didn't lessen the feeling that something unfair had happened to her family. She decided to look for a lawyer who could better explain the situation. The only lawyer she knew was Dr. Charles Anderson, who had a small office downtown and was known for serving low-income people. Rebecca passed through the simple reception and was seen by the lawyer himself, a 50-year-old man with a paternal manner. "Let's see these documents," said Dr. Charles, putting on reading glasses. He examined each paper carefully, taking notes on a pad. His expression was serious and focused, very different from the disinterest of the registry clerk. "These documents appear to be authentic," he said finally. "The paper, the signatures, the stamps, everything indicates they are originals from the period." "So my grandmother really was the owner of this land?" "Apparently, yes. The question is, what happened between 1945 and today? How did the property pass to other hands? This would require an investigation of the public records. How much would an investigation like that cost?" Dr. Charles hesitated before answering, clearly trying to find a gentle way to explain financial realities. For a complete job, including archive research, document copies, possible filing of a lawsuit, we're talking several $1,000s. Rebecca's heart sank. Several $1,000s represented months of work for her. It was money she didn't have and couldn't easily get. "Doctor, I can't afford to pay for all of that at once. Would there be any way?" "Look, Rebecca, I'll be honest with you. Cases like this can drag on for years. And even if we prove there were irregularities in the property transfer, recovering it would be a long and expensive process. Sometimes it's better to accept that some past injustices cannot be undone." "But doctor, if my grandmother was robbed—" "I understand your outrage. But think practically. You have a daughter to raise, you work as a house cleaner, you live on a tight budget. Is spending what little you have on an uncertain legal battle really the best investment?" The lawyer's words were sensible, but they stung. Rebecca left the office feeling like she was being cowardly for considering giving up before even trying. At the same time, the responsibility for Emily weighed on her shoulders. She couldn't risk their precarious stability for a cause that could lead them to financial ruin. That night, while Emily did her homework at the kitchen table, Rebecca kept looking at the documents spread out on the bed. She felt a mix of anger and sadness imagining her grandmother being forced to give up her land without any way to legally defend herself. "Mummy, are you sad?" asked Emily, appearing at the bedroom door. "A little bit, sweetie." "Is it because of Grandma's papers?" "Yes. I'm thinking if we should try to find out more about them or if it's better to keep them as a memory." Emily approached and picked up the birth certificate of the great-grandmother she had never met. "Did she look like you, Mummy?" "I don't know, honey. I have very few pictures of her." "I think we should try to find out more. Maybe Grandma hid these papers because she wanted someone in the family to find them one day." Emily's innocent perspective brought a new way of seeing the situation. Perhaps the discovery wasn't a coincidence. Perhaps her grandmother really had hope that one day justice would be done. The following week, Rebecca decided to do her own investigation, even with limited resources. She started by visiting the municipal library, where there was a historical archive with old newspapers and town records. The librarian, Mrs. Cynthia, took an interest in the research and offered help. "We're digitizing the old archives, but the work is slow. A lot of the documents from the 1940s and 1950s are still only on paper. Would you have the patience to research manually?" Rebecca accepted the offer. She spent her free hours at the library, leafing through yellowed newspapers and old municipal records. The work was tedious, but gradually she began to find interesting clues about her family's history. In an edition of the local newspaper from 1951, she found a small note about a land dispute involving the widow Mitchell. The text was brief and biased, but it mentioned that the woman had recently lost her husband and was being pressured by creditors to sell her rural property. In another newspaper, from 1952, there was an announcement for a judicial auction to sell rural property belonging to the estate of William Henderson. The details matched exactly the property mentioned in the documents found in the washing machine. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now continuing. These discoveries confirmed the suspicion that something had happened to the property after her grandfather's death. Rebecca began to form a mental picture of the events. William Henderson dies young, leaving Dorothy a widow with small children. Without legal knowledge or financial resources, she can't keep the property and is forced to sell it. But crucial details were still missing. Who were these creditors? Was the sale fair or abusive? Was there any irregularity that could be contested decades later? Mrs. Cynthia helped her locate probate records in the municipal archive. The probate process for William Henderson was preserved, although some pages were damaged by moisture. Even so, it was possible to read important information. The probate listed the rural property as the most valuable asset of the estate. There were also outstanding debts, mainly to a local merchant named Anthony Parker Williams. The debts did not seem excessively high relative to the property's value, but the document indicated that Dorothy had been pressured to accept a quick sale to settle them. Anthony Parker Williams, Rebecca repeated the name aloud. "Mrs. Cynthia, do you know anyone with that last name in town?" "The Williams family, yes, there are the Williamses who own the building supply store. A traditional family here, but I don't know if there's any relation." Rebecca noted the name to investigate later. If there had been any irregularity in the collection of those debts, or if the sale was forced for a below-market price, that could constitute an injustice deserving of redress. That afternoon, she decided to visit the building supply store mentioned by Mrs. Cynthia. It was a large, clearly prosperous establishment, located on one of the town's main avenues. The owner, a man in his 60s, received her cordially when she asked about the family history. "I'm Anthony Williams, Jr.," he introduced himself. "My father founded this business in the 50s. Why the interest in our family?" Rebecca explained her research into her grandmother's property, mentioning the original creditor's name without making direct accusations. The man's expression changed visibly when she spoke about Dorothy Mitchell Henderson. "Ah, that story," he said, obviously uncomfortable. "My father did lend money to small rural producers. It was a common business at the time. Do you know any details about my grandmother's specific case? Look, that was a long time ago. My father passed away in the 80s and never liked to talk about the old business. He said he preferred to look forward, not back." The evasiveness confirmed Rebecca's suspicions. If everything had been done correctly, why the discomfort when speaking about it? Why the reluctance to provide details? "Mr. Anthony, the property my grandmother lost is worth a lot of money today, isn't it?" "I wouldn't know. I don't follow the real estate market in the area." Rebecca knew he was lying. Any local businessman knew property values in town well, especially land that had appreciated with urban development. Leaving the store, she felt frustrated but also more determined. The evasive reactions from both Mrs. Helen and Anthony Williams, Jr. suggested there really was something to hide about the loss of the family property. That night, Rebecca made an important decision. Even without the resources to hire a private lawyer, she would seek help from the public defender's office. If there was a legal basis to challenge the loss of the property, the state had an obligation to help her. The public defender's office operated in an old building in the city center. The waiting line was long, composed mainly of people in social situations similar to hers. Rebecca waited patiently with Emily by her side, who had skipped class to accompany her mother on this important day. Dr. Stephen Carter, the public defender who assisted her, was a young man, recently graduated, with genuine enthusiasm for social causes. He examined the documents with growing interest. "This documentation is really interesting," he commented. "I'll be frank. Cases of reverse adverse possession or challenging old sales are complex and not always successful. But there are elements here that deserve investigation." "What kind of elements?" "The time difference between the debts and the forced sale, for example. If your grandmother was pressured to sell for below market value, that could constitute injury. Furthermore, if there were flaws in the probate process or coercion to accept the sale, that would also be questionable." "Do you think it's worth trying?" "I think it's worth investigating more deeply before deciding. I'll request copies of all official records related to the property. With the complete history in hand, we could better evaluate the possibilities." Rebecca left the public defender's office with more hope than she had felt in weeks. Dr. Stephen had shown genuine interest in the case and seemed competent to conduct the necessary investigation. 2 weeks later, the public defender called her for a new meeting. He had managed to access documents that clarified the situation significantly. "Rebecca, I have good news and bad news," said Dr. Stephen. "The good, there really were irregularities in the sale of your grandmother's property. The price paid was well below market value, and there are indications she was pressured to accept the transaction quickly. And the bad news? Time. More than 60 years have passed since the sale. The law provides statutes of limitations for challenging transactions, even irregular ones. It would be very difficult to reverse the sale based solely on procedural irregularities. So there's nothing that can be done? I didn't say that. There is a different possibility. If we can prove there was fraud in the transaction, meaning your grandmother was deliberately deceived or coerced, we could file a lawsuit for moral and material damages. We wouldn't recover the property, but we could secure compensation. The prospect of compensation was less exciting than recovering the family lands, but it still represented a possibility for justice and significant financial improvement. What kind of evidence would we need? Witnesses from the time, documents that prove coercion or fraud, evidence that the price paid was abusively low. It's extensive investigative work, but feasible. And how long would it take? A year, maybe 2. It depends on the cooperation of the people involved and the availability of documents. Rebecca agreed to proceed with the investigation. Dr. Stephen advised her on how to look for witnesses and additional documents that could strengthen the case. In the following weeks, Rebecca divided her time between her work as a house cleaner and the investigation into her family. She sought out elderly people in the city who might remember the events of 1951-1952. Many had passed away, others had fragmented memories, but some provided valuable information. Mrs. Evelyn, 83 years old, clearly remembered Dorothy Mitchell Henderson and the difficulties she faced after being widowed. Poor Dorothy. She didn't understand anything about paperwork, laws, those things. When William died, she was lost. She had 3 small children and didn't know how to maintain the property. Do you remember how the sale happened? I remember she was desperate. People showed up saying she had to pay debts she didn't even know existed. They pressured her so much that she ended up agreeing to sell for any price just to get rid of the problem. What kind of pressure? Threats that they would lose everything, that the children would be on the street, that she could even be arrested for debts. Nonsense, right? But she didn't know. She was a simple woman, uneducated. This testimony confirmed the theory that Dorothy had been deceived and coerced. Mrs. Evelyn agreed to testify formally if necessary, providing a crucial witness for the case. Other conversations revealed additional details about the Williams family and their way of doing business at the time. Apparently, Anthony Parker Williams had a habit of lending money to small rural producers under unfavorable terms, expecting them to be unable to pay so he could then take their properties. It was a common practice back then, explained Mr. Gerald, 77 years old. They took advantage of simple people's ignorance. They lent little money, but with abusive interest and short terms. When they couldn't pay, they lost everything. Wasn't that a crime? Today it would be. In those days, justice favored those with more money and influence. The poor had to fend for themselves as best they could. Dr. Stephen was excited by the testimonies collected by Rebecca. Along with the official documents he had obtained, a solid case for damages was beginning to take shape. "We are making good progress," he said during a meeting. "I have documents here that show the property's true market value at the time and confirm that your grandmother received less than 30% of what she should have. Combined with the testimonies of coercion, we have grounds for a lawsuit." "How much longer until we file the suit?" "A few weeks. I need to organize all the documentation and draft the initial petition." Rebecca was anxious to see justice done, but also apprehensive about the possible reactions from those involved. Since she had begun the investigation more openly, she felt she was being watched. Nothing concrete, just an uncomfortable feeling that her movements were being followed. This feeling intensified when she arrived home one afternoon and found signs that someone had been through her things. Nothing had been stolen, but drawers were slightly disorganized and some papers were out of place. "Emily, did you go through my things today?" she asked, trying to keep her voice calm. "No, Mommy." "Why?" "It's nothing, sweetie. I was just looking for some papers." Rebecca checked if the original documents found in the washing machine were still where she had hidden them. They were intact, but she decided to move them to a safer place. She took them to Mrs. Margaret, asking her employer to keep them temporarily. "Of course, dear, but is something wrong?" "I'm not sure, Mrs. Margaret. Maybe it's just my paranoia, but I think someone is interested in these papers. If they're that important, it's better to leave them in a safe place." The following week, Rebecca's phone rang during dinner. It was an unknown number. "Rebecca Mitchell?" asked a male voice. "Speaking. Who is this?" "This is Paul Henry Morgan, an attorney. I would like to speak with you about some old documents you recently found." Rebecca's heart raced. How did this man know about the documents? "I don't understand what you're talking about." "Mrs. Mitchell, we know you found documents belonging to your grandmother, Dorothy Mitchell Henderson. I represent parties interested in making a proposal to resolve this situation amicably." What kind of proposal? I would prefer to speak in person. Could we meet tomorrow at 10 in the morning at the Central Square? Rebecca hesitated. The situation was becoming more complicated than she had imagined. She decided to accept the meeting, but first she would inform Dr. Stephen about the call. All right, Central Square, 10 o'clock. That night she called the public defender and told him about the mysterious call. Dr. Stephen was concerned. Rebecca, this confirms there is significant interest in the property. Someone is monitoring your movements and anticipating our legal actions. What should I do tomorrow? Go to the meeting, but just listen. Don't accept anything. Don't sign anything. Don't commit to anything. Just listen to the proposal and say you need to consult your attorney. Should I bring the documents? Absolutely not. And if possible, bring someone as a witness. Rebecca slept poorly that night, wondering what awaited her the next day. She woke up early, dropped Emily off at school and asked Mrs. Margaret to accompany her to the meeting as a witness. The Central Square was busy at that hour of the morning. Elderly people played dominoes, children played in the playground, vendors passed by offering their goods. Rebecca chose a bench near the center, where she would be visible but with people around. At 10 o'clock sharp, a man in a suit approached. He was elegant, well-dressed, with a leather briefcase and the appearance of a successful professional. Mrs. Mitchell, I'm Paul Henry Morgan. They greeted each other and sat down. Mrs. Margaret sat on a nearby bench, pretending to read a magazine but paying attention to the conversation. Mrs. Rebecca, I'll be direct. I represent the current owners of your grandmother's former property. We know you found documents and are considering legal action. And what does that have to do with your clients? Everything. Any challenge to the property affects the current owners. Even if the lawsuit isn't successful, the process creates bureaucratic problems and unnecessary costs. Go on. My clients would like to make a generous offer to avoid legal complications. They are willing to pay a voluntary settlement of 50,000 Rs in exchange for a document where you renounce any rights to the property. 50,000 Rs was a surreal amount for Rebecca. It represented almost 3 years of work as a house cleaner. It was enough money to completely change her life and Emily's. It's an interesting proposal, she said, trying to hide the impact of the offer. It's more than interesting. It's generous. Considering your lawsuit has little chance of success, it's an opportunity to resolve everything without risk. How did your clients find out about the documents? We haven't filed any action yet. Newport is a small town. Information travels fast. The evasive answer confirmed she really was being watched. This made her wonder if the 50,000 Rs was truly a generous offer, or if the property was worth much more than she imagined. I need to consult my lawyer before making any decision. Of course, that's natural, but the offer has a deadline, 1 week. After that, it will be withdrawn. Why the rush? My clients want to resolve this quickly. The more time passes, the more complicated the situation becomes for everyone. Rebecca politely said goodbye, promising to give an answer within the stipulated time. Mrs. Margaret walked her to the exit of the square. What a strange man, the elderly woman commented. Too elegant to be interested in an old rural property. I thought so too, and his rush suggests the property is worth much more than 50,000 Rs. That afternoon, Rebecca told everything to Dr. Stephen. The public defender confirmed her suspicions. 50,000 is money, but it probably represents a fraction of the property's real value. If they're offering that without even needing to, imagine what it's really worth. Do you think I should accept? That decision is yours, Rebecca. I can only guide you on the legal aspects. If we accept their proposal, the case ends here. If we proceed with the lawsuit, we could get much more, but we could also get nothing. What are the real chances of success in court? Honestly, 60% chance we get some compensation, maybe even more than 50,000. 40% chance we get nothing and still have legal costs. Rebecca spent the following days in internal conflict. 50,000 Rs would solve all her immediate problems. It would allow her to move out of rental housing, buy a small house, give Emily a better education, have financial security for a few years. On the other hand, The rush and nervousness of those interested in the property suggested there was much more at stake. Perhaps her grandmother really had been the victim of a great injustice that deserved full reparation. Emily noticed her mother's worry and tried to help in her own way. "Mommy, are you thinking about what to do with Grandma's papers?" "I am, sweetheart." "What do you think Grandma would want us to do?" Her daughter's simple question brought a new perspective. Dorothy Mitchell Henderson had preserved those documents even after losing everything. There was a reason for that. Perhaps it wasn't just about money, but about justice and dignity. "I think she would want us to fight for the truth, even if it's difficult." "So that's what we should do." Emily's innocent conviction helped Rebecca make her decision. The next day she called Paul Henry Morgan. "I've decided not to accept the offer. We'll proceed with the lawsuit." There was a long silence before the lawyer's response. "Are you sure about this? It's a decision you might regret." "I'm sure." "Very well. But know that my clients will not be pleased. They may reconsider the generosity they showed." "I understand. Thank you for the offer." Rebecca hung up, feeling a mix of fear and determination. She had made the riskiest decision, but one that seemed morally right to her. Dr. Stephen was pleased with her choice and sped up preparations to file the lawsuit. 2 weeks later, the initial petition was filed at the city courthouse, formalizing the claim for compensation for moral and material damages resulting from the irregular sale of Dorothy Mitchell Henderson's property. The reaction was not long in coming. 3 days after filing, Rebecca was visited by a private investigator who introduced himself politely but asked intimidating questions about her personal life, work, and family. "I heard you're filing a very interesting lawsuit," said the man. "You must have a lot of confidence in your case." "I have confidence in justice. Justice sometimes takes a while to arrive, and when it does, it's not always the way we expect. Do you have any specific business to discuss with me?" "I just wanted to meet you. In small towns, it's important to know the people involved in important matters." The visit was clearly an attempt at intimidation, but Rebecca stood firm. She reported the episode to Dr. Stephen, who recommended filing a police report for harassment. In the following weeks, other forms of pressure appeared. Rebecca began receiving anonymous calls at inconvenient hours. Her main employer, Mrs. Margaret, was approached by someone interested in hiring the services of the housekeeper who works for you. "It was very strange," Mrs. Margaret recounted. "The man asked a lot of questions about you. When I said you were a trustworthy person, he replied that trustworthy people sometimes make poor choices." "Do you think I should be worried?" "I think we should be careful. But we shouldn't be afraid to do what's right." Mrs. Margaret's support was important to maintaining Rebecca's determination. The elderly woman had enough life experience to understand when something was worth fighting for. Dr. Stephen informed her that the opposing party had hired a renowned law firm from Providence to defend the case. This confirmed the importance of the lawsuit and also indicated there would be strong resistance. "They will try to prolong the process and discourage you through attrition," explained the public defender. "It's a common tactic in cases like these." "How long could it take?" "At least a year, possibly 2 or 3 if there are appeals." "And the costs?" "For us, there are no direct costs because you are entitled to free legal assistance. For them, the costs are high, so they will try to settle quickly if they realize we have a strong case." The lawsuit began its normal proceedings. The opposing party presented its defense, denying any irregularity in the original sale and claiming the rights had expired. Dr. Stephen countered with the testimonies and documents collected during the investigation. During this period, Rebecca maintained her work routine but noticed subtle changes in her social life. Some people in the neighborhood seemed to avoid her. Others made indirect comments about those who aren't content with their situation. "Something strange is going on around here," she commented to Mrs. Helen during a casual encounter. "It seems you've stirred up a hornet's nest, my dear. There are many powerful people interested in keeping certain things from the past undisturbed. Do you know something specific?" "I know your family wasn't the only one harmed. There are other similar stories that were buried over time. Other families lost properties the same way. They lost them and never spoke about it. They were afraid, ashamed, lacked the resources to fight. You are the first who decided to confront it." This information gave Rebecca Mitchell a broader perspective on the situation. Perhaps her fight wasn't just for her family, but for other victims of the same injustice. Dr. Stephen Carter confirmed this suspicion when he gained access to broader archives about rural property transactions in the 1950s. Rebecca, I found a pattern. Between 1950 and 1955, at least 12 small rural properties were sold under similar circumstances, all involving debts to the same creditors and at prices apparently below market value. Does that mean there was an organized scheme? Apparently so. A group of people specialized in acquiring properties from vulnerable families using questionable methods. And what happened to those properties? Most were resold years later for values far higher than what was paid to the original owners. Some became profitable commercial ventures. The discovery transformed Rebecca's individual case into a matter of public interest. Dr. Carter suggested contacting the public prosecutor's office to investigate a possible irregular land appropriation scheme. If we can prove there was a criminal pattern, it greatly strengthens your individual case and could lead to restitution for other harmed families. Rebecca agreed to expand the investigation, even knowing it would complicate and prolong the process. She felt a responsibility not only to her own family, but to all the other victims of the same injustice. The public prosecutor's office agreed to investigate the case after analyzing the documents presented by Dr. Carter. A prosecutor specializing in property crimes took over the investigation, which gained the character of a public interest matter. The news that the public prosecutor's office was investigating a possible historical land appropriation scheme caused a stir in the city. The local newspaper published an article about the case, mentioning Rebecca as the housekeeper who discovered old documents that led to the investigation. The public exposure brought unexpected consequences. Several people sought out Rebecca to tell similar stories from their own families. It was discovered that the suspected scheme was even larger than imagined. My grandfather lost his land in 1953, recounted Mrs. Agnes, a 70-year-old woman. He always said he was cheated, but we never had a way to prove it. My family also lost property around that time, said Mr. John, 65 years old. My father died young, and my mother was forced to sell for almost nothing. The accounts multiplied, forming an extensive picture of systematic injustices. The public prosecutor was impressed by the number of similar cases that emerged. We are facing a scheme that harmed dozens of families over several years, explained Dr. Maurice Patterson, the prosecutor in charge. This goes far beyond Mrs. Rebecca Mitchell's individual case. The public prosecutor's investigation brought resources and expertise that the individual case would not have had. Specialists in historical documents confirmed the authenticity of the papers found in the washing machine. Economists calculated the updated losses from the irregular sales. To everyone's surprise, the calculations indicated that the property of Dorothy Mitchell Henderson alone would have a current value exceeding $2 million. The land had appreciated enormously with the urban development of the region. 2 million? Rebecca repeated the number, unable to believe it. It's a conservative estimate, explained Dr. Maurice. The location has become prime with the city's growth. There are profitable commercial developments built exactly on those lands. The information completely changed the perspective of the case. It was no longer just about symbolic reparation, but about an injustice with massive financial impact. Naturally, the resistance from the opposing side intensified proportionally. New lawyers were hired, legal appeals were filed, and the intimidation attempts became more sophisticated. Rebecca began receiving offers for special jobs that would pay very well provided she moved to another city and started a new life. The offers were always made through intermediaries and never directly in a way that could be proven. They want to get me out of town, Rebecca realized during a conversation with Dr. Stephen. Obviously, your presence here is a constant reminder of the case and a focal point for organizing other affected families. I'm not leaving. This is my city, my life. I understand, but we must take extra precautions for your safety and Emily's. Mrs. Margaret offered for Rebecca and Emily to stay at her house during the most tense period of the investigation. The elderly woman's house was larger, safer, and located on a busy street where it would be difficult to do anything to them without being noticed. "It's not charity," insisted Mrs. Margaret when Rebecca hesitated to accept. "It's solidarity. You are fighting for justice, not just for yourself, but for the whole community." The temporary move was beneficial for Emily, who gained an adoptive grandma in Mrs. Margaret. The girl adapted well to the new routine and seemed not to notice the tension surrounding the situation. Dr. Morris reported that the public prosecutor's investigation was progressing rapidly. Old bank documents had been located, showing the flow of money between those involved in the land appropriation scheme. "We have found evidence that the same group of people was involved in all the irregular transactions," explained the prosecutor. "There is a clear pattern of criminal behavior." "And does that help my specific case?" "It helps a lot. It proves it wasn't an isolated case, but part of a larger scheme. This characterizes intent and premeditation, strengthening your right to reparation." The investigation revealed that some descendants of those responsible for the scheme still had direct benefits from the improperly appropriated properties. This opened the possibility of civil liability for the heirs. Among the current beneficiaries was the family that controlled Horizon Real Estate Development LLC, the company that appeared as the current owner of the old land of Dorothy Mitchell Henderson. "Did they know about the irregular origin of the property?" asked Rebecca. "We are investigating that. If they knew and knowingly benefited from the proceeds of a crime, they can be held civilly liable. The net was closing in on those responsible." This explained the escalation in attempts to settle the case out of court. Settlement offers began arriving more frequently and with progressively larger amounts. Paul Henry Morgan, the lawyer who had made the first offer, called again. "Mrs. Mitchell, my clients are willing to reconsider the previous offer." They could offer $200,000 to resolve this amicably. $200,000. It's 4 times the initial offer, an amount that would completely change your life. "I'll consult my lawyer and the public prosecutor's investigation." The public prosecutor could complicate everything. Sometimes it's better to settle things in the civil sphere without involving criminal matters. The call confirmed that those under investigation were worried about the criminal ramifications of the investigation. 200,000 reais was a lot of money, but it still represented only 10% of the estimated value of the original property. Dr. Stephen and Dr. Maurice met with Rebecca to discuss the new proposal. "The decision is still yours," said Dr. Stephen, "but now we have much more information about the true value of the compensation you deserve." "If we accept the civil settlement, does it affect the criminal investigation?" asked Rebecca. "Not necessarily," replied Dr. Maurice. "The criminal investigation proceeds independently of the civil settlement, but your cooperation as a victim is important for the process." "And if I don't accept the settlement?" "We continue with the lawsuit, which now has a much greater chance of success due to the evidence gathered in the criminal investigation." Rebecca requested a week to make the final decision. She wanted to talk with the other affected families and better understand the implications of accepting or refusing the settlement. During that week, there was an informal meeting at Mrs. Margaret's house with representatives from several families who had discovered they were victims of the same scheme. The solidarity among them was palpable. "If you accept a small settlement now, they will use it to minimize the cases of the other families," warned Mrs. Agnes. "But if she refuses and loses in court, she gets nothing," pondered Mr. John. "The important thing is that she does what's best for her and her daughter," said Mrs. Margaret. "No one can judge the decision she makes." The conversation helped Rebecca understand that her decision had an impact beyond her own family, but also that she could not sacrifice Emily's well-being for a larger cause. That night, she had a serious conversation with her daughter, trying to explain the situation appropriately for a 7-year-old. "Mommy, if we accept the money, will we have a house of our own?" "Yes, sweetheart. Our own house with a yard for you to play in." "And if we don't accept it?" "We might get more money later, or we might get nothing." "But would Grandma Dorothy be happy if we fought for the truth?" Her daughter's innocent question again brought clarity to the situation. Dorothy Mitchell Henderson had preserved those documents, even after losing everything. There was a message in that gesture. "I think so, Emily. I think she would be happy if we fought for the truth. Then that's what we should do, right, Mommy? Yes, my love, that's what we should do. The next morning, Rebecca called Paul Henry Morgan. I've decided to refuse the proposal. We will continue with the lawsuit. There was a long pause before the response. Mrs. Mitchell, this may be your last opportunity to resolve this without greater complications. I understand, but some things are more important than easy money. I hope you don't regret this decision. I hope so too. From that decision onward, the tone of the situation changed noticeably. Settlement attempts ceased and were replaced by a more aggressive strategy of legal defense and questioning the legitimacy of the entire investigation. Lawyers for the opposing side began to question the competence of Dr. Stephen and Dr. Morris, alleging that the case was being conducted in a biased and technically inadequate manner. Bureaucratic appeals were filed to delay the process. It's a war of attrition, explained Dr. Maurice. They want to wear you down and make you give up out of pure exhaustion. How long can this last? Months, maybe years. It depends on how many appeals they are willing to file. And the other families? What about them? Some are holding firm, others are considering giving up. It's understandable. They are simple people who didn't expect to face such a complex legal battle. Rebecca understood that her persistence was becoming crucial not only for her own case, but to keep the fight of all the affected families alive. The responsibility was great, but also motivating. During the following months, the case gained regional attention. Newspapers from Providence published reports about the largest scheme of irregular land appropriation ever discovered in Rhode Island. The story of Rebecca, the housekeeper who found documents in an old washing machine, became a symbol of the fight for justice. The media exposure brought unexpected support. Human rights organizations offered additional legal assistance. Universities sent law students to help research historical documents. The cause gained a social dimension that no one had foreseen. Meanwhile, Rebecca's personal life was transforming. The experience of the legal battle had developed in her a confidence and articulation she didn't know she possessed. She began giving talks about workers' rights and preserving family documents. Mrs. Margaret observed this transformation with pride. "You're not the same timid person who accepted that washing machine 2 years ago," she commented. "Sometimes even I don't recognize who I've become. Your grandmother would be proud, not just for what you discovered, but for who you've become in the process." Emily was also growing amid that experience. At 9 years old, she already understood concepts of justice and fighting for rights that many children never learn. She participated in family meetings and asked intelligent questions about the progress of the case. "Mommy, when all this is over, are we going to be rich?" "I don't know, sweetie, but we'll be people who fought for what's right. And that's more important than being rich." "I know, I was just curious." After almost 2 years of legal battle, the case finally reached the trial phase. The assigned judge was known for his competence in complex cases involving property rights. Dr. Stephen and Dr. Maurice worked together preparing the final arguments. They had in hand an impressive set of evidence: historical documents, testimonies, technical reports, economic analyses, and the broad context of the criminal scheme revealed by the investigation. "We have a solid case," said Dr. Stephen on the eve of the trial. "But the outcome is never guaranteed. Justice is sometimes unpredictable." "I've done what I could do," replied Rebecca. "The rest is not up to me." The trial hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday in March. Rebecca arrived at the courthouse accompanied by Emily, Mrs. Margaret, and several other families who had similar cases. The hallway was full of people interested in the outcome. On the opposite side, the representatives of the current landowners arrived with a team of expensive lawyers and assistants. The disparity in resources was evident, but Rebecca felt strengthened by the community's support. During the hearing, Dr. Stephen methodically presented all the evidence collected. He showed the original documentation found in the washing machine, the historical records that proved the irregularity of the sale, the testimonies of people who knew Dorothy Mitchell Henderson, and the technical analyses of the property's value. The opposing counsel argued that too much time had passed, that the current owners had no responsibility for any historical irregularities, and that Rebecca did not have sufficient documents to prove current rights to the property. Dr. Maurice presented the evidence from the criminal investigation, showing there had been an organized scheme and that some of the current beneficiaries were aware of the irregular origin of the properties. The trial lasted 2 sessions, with detailed arguments from both sides. The judge demonstrated deep knowledge of the case and asked specific questions that showed he was carefully analyzing all the evidence. "The decision will be communicated in 2 weeks, announced the magistrate at the end of the second session. Those 2 weeks were the longest of Rebecca Mitchell's life. She tried to maintain a normal routine, but the anxiety was constant. Emily sensed her mother's tension and made an effort to behave perfectly. Mrs. Margaret was a crucial support during this period, distracting Rebecca with conversations about other topics and making sure she didn't become isolated with her worries. On the morning scheduled for the announcement of the verdict, Rebecca arrived early at the courthouse. Dr. Carter and Dr. Patterson were already there, trying to mask their own anxiety. The judge entered the room and began reading the verdict. His initial words were technical, explaining the legal grounds for the decision. Rebecca tried to understand if the tone was favorable or unfavorable, but the legal language was difficult to interpret. Finally, he reached the dispositive part of the judgment. "I rule in favor of the plaintiff, Rebecca Mitchell, recognizing that there were irregularities in the sale of her grandmother Dorothy Mitchell Henderson's rural property, which constitute injury and vitiated consent. I order the defendants to pay compensation for moral and material damages in the amount of $800,000, adjusted for inflation from the date of the judgment." Rebecca couldn't immediately process what she had heard. $800,000? She had won. She had really won. Dr. Carter held her arm and whispered, "We won, Rebecca. We won." The courtroom erupted in applause from the families following the case. Mrs. Margaret cried with joy. Emily jumped into her mother's lap without fully understanding what was happening, but feeling the emotion of the moment. On the defense side, there were whispered conversations and expressions of discontent. It was evident they would appeal the decision, but at least there was an initial victory. In the days following the verdict, Rebecca was approached by journalists interested in telling her story. The cleaning lady who found justice in an old washing machine became a symbol of perseverance in the fight for rights. "How do you feel knowing you might receive $800,000? asked a reporter. "I feel happier to have proven that my grandmother was wrong than for the money itself," Rebecca answered. "The money is important. It will change our lives, but justice being served is even more important." The answer was widely published and reinforced Rebecca's image as someone fighting for principles, not just personal gain. As expected, the opposing party appealed the decision. The case moved to the Court of Appeals, where it would be judged again by 3 appellate judges. "How long does an appeal take?" asked Rebecca. "Between 6 months and a year," explained Dr. Carter. "But our position is strong. We have a favorable verdict based on solid evidence." During the appeal period, Rebecca's life remained in limbo. She couldn't make definitive plans with the money she might receive, but she also couldn't ignore the possibility of a radical change in her financial situation. Emily, now 10 years old, understood the situation better and showed impressive maturity for her age. "Mommy, if we don't win in the end, will you be sad?" "A little, sweetheart. But I won't regret having fought." "Me neither. I learned it's important to fight for what's right, even when it's hard." 6 months later, news arrived that the Court of Appeals had unanimously upheld the verdict. Not only did they maintain the award of $800,000, but they also praised the quality of the investigation and the justice of the decision. The confirmation of the verdict in the appeals court made it much more difficult for the opposing party to continue appealing. There was still the possibility of appeals to higher courts, but the chances of success were minimal. 3 months later, the opposing party's lawyers approached Dr. Carter to negotiate a settlement that would definitively end the lawsuit. "Our clients would like to settle the debt in a lump sum for 600,000 Rs, avoiding additional appeals and monetary corrections," they proposed. Rebecca Mitchell was torn between accepting a certain amount, though smaller, or risking continuing the process longer in hopes of receiving the full amount. "What do you advise?" she asked Dr. Stephen Carter. "Legally, our position is very strong. The chances of them overturning the sentence in higher courts are small. But the process could drag on for another year or two. And financially, 600,000 now, or 800,000 2 years from now, with the risk of reduction. It's a difficult decision. Rebecca spoke with Emily, Mrs. Margaret, and the other families involved. The unanimous opinion was that she should accept the offer. 600,000 reais completely changes both of your lives, said Mrs. Margaret, and more importantly, justice has been served. Your grandmother has been avenged. Mum, can we buy our house and still have money left to help me study at a good college? Asked Emily. There will be plenty left and even a reserve for emergencies. Then I think it's enough. The next day, Rebecca informed Dr. Stephen Carter of her decision to accept the settlement. The case was closed with the payment of 600,000 reais, transferred to a bank account she opened specifically to receive the amount. Dear listener, if you are enjoying the story, please take a moment to leave a like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we are just starting out. Now continuing, Rebecca's first step was to buy a house of her own. She chose a simple but comfortable home with 3 bedrooms, a large backyard, and a location close to Emily's school. The house cost 200,000 reais, leaving a substantial amount for other investments. Mrs. Margaret was invited to the housewarming party. The emotion was evident in everyone present, especially the other families who had had similar cases and were inspired by Rebecca's victory to fight for their own rights. I never thought that old washing machine I gave you would change so many lives, commented Mrs. Margaret. You changed my life the moment you gave me that machine, replied Rebecca, and I don't even know if it was a coincidence or if you knew there was something special about it. Mrs. Margaret smiled mysteriously. Sometimes coincidences happen when we are ready for them. Rebecca never knew if Mrs. Margaret really knew about the documents or if it was just a happy coincidence, but it didn't matter. What mattered was that justice had been done. With financial stability achieved, Rebecca was able to reduce her workload as a house cleaner and dedicate herself to other activities. She began taking training courses and got involved with organizations that helped people in legal situations similar to what she had faced. Her experience became a reference for other families who discovered they had rights to properties that had been irregularly lost in the past. She offered guidance on how to preserve documents, seek legal assistance, and not give up in the face of difficulties. Emily grew up proud of her family's history and her mother's fight. She developed an early interest in law and social justice, saying she wanted to become a lawyer to help people in similar situations. I want to be like Dr. Stephen Carter, she would say. I want to help poor people who have been wronged. You can be anything you want, my love, Rebecca would answer. Now we have the means to invest in your education. 2 years after the case closed, Rebecca learned that the criminal investigation conducted by the public prosecutor's office had resulted in the conviction of some people involved in the historical land-grabbing scheme. Although the crimes had passed the statute of limitations for criminal prosecution, the investigation served to clarify the historical truth and help other families obtain civil reparations. In total, 17 families received some form of compensation based on the evidence uncovered during the investigation into Rebecca's case. The amounts varied according to each specific situation, but all received at least some reparation for the historical injustice they had suffered. The old washing machine that had revealed the important documents was given a place of honor in the backyard of Rebecca's new home. Emily kept it always clean and well-maintained, calling it the family treasure. Why don't you sell that old machine? And as an occasional visitor would ask. Because it brought justice to our family, Emily would reply. It's more valuable than any money. Rebecca agreed. The machine represented much more than an old appliance. It was a symbol that persistence and the fight for justice can prevail, even when the odds seem small. 5 years after the discovery of the documents, Rebecca received an unexpected invitation. The Federal University in Rhode Island wanted to invite her to give a lecture on preserving family memory and the fight for rights at a civil law seminar. I don't have a university degree, said Rebecca. I'm not sure I'm the right person. You have something more valuable than academic training, explained the organizing professor. You have real experience and an inspiring story of fighting for justice. Rebecca accepted the invitation and prepared carefully for the lecture. She wanted to convey not only her personal story, but the lessons learned about persistence, the importance of family documents, and the right of ordinary people to fight for justice. The lecture was a success. Law students asked intelligent questions and showed interest in specializing in social justice cases similar to what she had faced. "You will be lawyers," Rebecca said at the end of the presentation. "Remember that not everyone who needs justice has money to pay high fees. Sometimes the most important cases are those of ordinary people who just want the truth to be acknowledged." The speech was warmly applauded, and some students approached Rebecca afterward to talk about their motivations for choosing law as a profession. In that moment, Rebecca realized her story had become bigger than herself. It was no longer just about a woman who found documents in a washing machine, but about the importance of fighting for justice even when it seems impossible. Emily, now 15, accompanied her mother to the lecture and felt proud seeing how her family's story inspired others. "Mom, do you think Grandma Dorothy imagined that those papers she saved would make all this difference?" she asked on the way back home. "I think she had hope, sweetheart. Hope that one day the truth would come out and justice would be done." And it did. Yes, it did, and much more than she could have imagined. Rebecca looked out the bus window, watching the familiar landscape of Newport pass by outside. Her life had changed completely since that morning when she accepted an old washing machine from Mrs. Margaret. She had her own home, financial security, community recognition, and, most importantly, the satisfaction of having achieved justice for her grandmother and for other families. Emily was growing up with solid values and educational prospects she herself had never had. But above all, Rebecca had discovered she was capable of much more than she had imagined. The timid and insecure woman who had accepted that old machine had transformed into a rights advocate, lecturer, and a reference for other people in similar situations. Dr. Stephen continued defending social justice cases and occasionally sent news about new lawsuits based on the evidence discovered during the original investigation. He always said that Rebecca's case had been the most remarkable of his career. Dr. Maurice was promoted in his career at the public prosecutor's office and specialized in crimes against historical heritage. The investigation into the land appropriation scheme became a national reference for similar cases. Mrs. Margaret continued living in her large house, but now received frequent visits from Rebecca and Emily. The two had become family in heart, united by the shared experience. The elderly woman always made a point of showing visitors the framed newspaper photo she kept in the living room, where Rebecca appeared on the courthouse steps after winning the case. "This girl here proved that an ordinary person can achieve justice if they have the courage to fight," she would say proudly. The other families who obtained reparations based on Rebecca's case stayed in touch, forming an informal support network. They would occasionally gather to share experiences and help new people who discovered they had similar cases. Mr. John received compensation of 300,000 rials for the property his family had lost. With the money, he opened a small business and significantly improved his living conditions. Mrs. Agnes received 200,000 rials and used the money to renovate her house and secure proper medical treatment for health problems she had been postponing due to lack of resources. In total, the reparations paid to the 17 families exceeded 10 million rials. The economic impact was significant for all of them, but the emotional impact of having the historical injustice recognized was even greater. The washing machine that had revealed the important documents became almost a local legend. People would visit Rebecca just to see the appliance that changed the history of so many families. Rebecca always told the full story to visitors, emphasizing that the important thing had not been the accidental discovery, but the decision to fight for the truth, even when everyone discouraged it. Many people would have kept the papers as a curiosity and would have done nothing, she would say. The difference wasn't finding the documents, it was deciding to do something with them. Emily finished high school with excellent grades and decided to study law, as she had always planned. She was accepted into one of the best universities in the state, with a partial scholarship for her academic performance. "I want to specialize in social law," she said on enrollment day. "I want to help people the way Mom helped our family." "You're going to be a better lawyer than anyone we know," replied Rebecca. Because you understand in practice what it means to fight for justice. During her college years, Emily interned at Stevens Law Firm and also at the Public Defender's Office where Dr. Maurice had worked. The experience reinforced her calling for social advocacy. In her graduation thesis, Emily wrote about the importance of preserving family documents in guaranteeing property rights, using her own family's case as the main study. Cases like my mother's show that justice can take decades to arrive, but it does not expire when it comes to truth and human dignity, she wrote in the conclusion of her work. The thesis was highly praised by her professors and was later published in an academic journal of civil law. Emily graduated with distinction and soon got a job at a non-governmental organization that defended the rights of rural communities. 10 years after the discovery of the documents, Rebecca was 42 years old and had a completely transformed life. She no longer worked as a day laborer, having become an informal consultant for people with legal issues similar to her own. Her home was frequently visited by lawyers, law students, journalists, and other families seeking guidance. She received everyone with patience and generosity, always willing to share her experience. "You've already helped over 100 families," commented Dr. Stephen during a visit. "You've become a true rights advocate." "I learned that when we achieve justice for ourselves, we have an obligation to help others achieve it too," replied Rebecca. Rebecca's personal transformation was evident to everyone who knew her. The timid woman who had accepted an old washing machine had become a respected and articulate community leader. Mrs. Margaret, now 82 years old, continued to be an important presence in the lives of Rebecca and Emily. Her health was more fragile, but her mind remained lucid and her wisdom was constantly sought after. "Do you think I should write a book telling this whole story?" asked Rebecca during one of her regular visits. "I think so," replied Mrs. Margaret. "Your story can inspire other people not to give up on their rights." "But I'm not a writer." "You weren't a lawyer and you defended yourself better than many lawyers. You weren't a public speaker and you speak better than university professors. Why couldn't you be a writer?" Mrs. Margaret's encouragement motivated Rebecca to begin writing her memoirs. The work was long and difficult, but therapeutic. Remembering the entire journey made her realize how much she had grown as a person. Emily helped with revising and organizing the text. Mother and daughter worked together for months, turning the experience into an opportunity for even greater closeness. "Mom, rereading all this, I'm impressed by your courage," said Emily. "You faced pressures that would have made anyone give up." "I didn't feel courageous at the time," replied Rebecca. "I felt scared most of the time, but I knew I was doing the right thing. That's true courage, doing what's right even when you're afraid." The book was finished after 2 years of work. Rebecca titled it The Washing Machine and the Documents of Truth, a story of the fight for justice. A local publisher agreed to publish the book, and it had a good regional impact. Municipal libraries in Rhode Island acquired copies, and schools began using the story as an example of rights education. During the book launch held at the Municipal Library in Newport, Rebecca was moved to see the room filled with people interested in her story. "This is not just my story," she said in her speech. "It's the story of all families who were once wronged but had no way to defend themselves. It's a reminder that justice may be delayed, but it should not be forgotten." Dr. Stephen and Dr. Maurice were present at the launch, as were many of the families who had obtained reparations based on Rebecca's case. It was an emotional gathering of people whose lives had been transformed by a casual discovery in an old washing machine. Emily gave a short but impactful speech during the event. "My mother always says that everything started when she accepted a washing machine that wasn't good for anything, but I learned that nothing is useless when placed in the hands of someone determined to make a difference. The machine was old, but the documents inside it carried truths that needed to be known." The applause was long and emotional. Many people had tears in their eyes, touched by the journey of a simple family that managed to turn injustice into victory through persistence. Years passed, and Rebecca's story continued to inspire others. "Your book was translated into European Portuguese and even cited in academic theses on property rights and social justice." Emily specialized in agrarian law and became one of the state's leading attorneys in land regularization cases. Her expertise was constantly requested by governmental and non-governmental organizations. "You became the lawyer I wish I'd had when I found the documents," said Rebecca with pride. "I became the lawyer you taught me to be," replied Emily. The informal professional partnership between mother and daughter grew stronger over the years. Rebecca identified potential cases through her network of community contacts, and Emily provided the necessary legal expertise to resolve them. Together, they helped over 200 families resolve complex property issues. Not all received financial reparations, but all gained clarity about their rights and guidance on how to proceed. The old washing machine remained in the backyard of the house, now treated as a family monument. Rebecca had it restored by a specialized technician who was impressed with the quality of the old manufacturing. "This machine could run for another 50 years if well cared for," said the technician. "They built them to last back then." "It has already lasted long enough to change our lives," replied Rebecca. "Now it's more a keepsake than an appliance." Mrs. Margaret passed away peacefully at 85, leaving a will that surprised everyone. Besides bequeathing part of her assets to distant nieces and nephews, she reserved a significant sum for Rebecca Mitchell and her daughter Emily in recognition of sincere friendship and the courageous fight for justice. "She didn't have to do this," said Rebecca, moved by her friend's posthumous generosity. "She wanted to," explained the attorney responsible for the will. "She left a letter explaining that you two were the family she chose to have." Mrs. Margaret's letter revealed that she indeed knew about the documents in the washing machine. She had been a close friend of Dorothy Mitchell Henderson and had helped hide the papers when the family situation became desperate. "I kept this secret for decades, waiting for the right moment to reveal it," the letter said. "When I met Rebecca and saw her dignity despite the hardships, I knew she was the right person to do justice to Dorothy's memory." The final revelation clarified why Mrs. Margaret had always been so supportive of Rebecca, and why she had specifically chosen her to receive the washing machine. It hadn't been a coincidence, but a carefully orchestrated plan to restore justice. "So she planned everything from the start," said Emily, impressed by the revelation. "Planned and patiently waited for the right moment," agreed Rebecca. "She knew I would do the right thing with the documents." The discovery of the truth about Mrs. Margaret's role made the story even more special. It wasn't just about a chance discovery, but about the friendship between two women separated by decades, but united by a sense of justice. Rebecca decided to use Mrs. Margaret's inheritance to create a small foundation to help other families with similar cases. The Dorothy Mitchell Foundation offered free legal assistance to people who discovered they had rights to properties that had been improperly lost. Emily took on the legal direction of the foundation, while Rebecca handled family outreach and community engagement. It was volunteer work that gave purpose and meaning to both their lives. Dr. Stephen retired from the Public Defender's Office, but continued collaborating with the foundation as a volunteer consultant. Dr. Maurice was promoted to state prosecutor and occasionally assisted the foundation with more complex cases. "You turned an individual case into a social cause," he remarked during a foundation meeting. "It's the kind of outcome every lawyer dreams of achieving." The foundation prospered and expanded its activities. Beyond estate cases, it began offering guidance on preserving family documents and education on basic rights for rural communities. 15 years after finding the documents in the washing machine, Rebecca was 52 years old, with a life trajectory she could never have imagined. From an insecure housekeeper to a respected social leader, her personal transformation was as impressive as the justice she had secured. Emily, now 27, was a recognized lawyer specializing in agricultural law. She had married a colleague who shared her passion for social justice, and they worked together on various cases. "Do you plan to have children soon?" Rebecca would occasionally ask. "I do, Mom. I want my children to grow up knowing the story of their great-grandmother Dorothy and the courage of their grandmother Rebecca." The prospect of becoming a grandmother moved Rebecca. It would be an opportunity to pass on to a new generation the values of fighting for justice and the importance of preserving family memory. The washing machine had become a local symbol. History students from the region sometimes visited Rebecca, to learn about the appliance that changed the lives of dozens of families. "It's funny how such a simple object became so important," she would comment during these visits. "It wasn't the object that was important," Emily always replied. "It was what you did with what you found inside it." The distinction was important. The machine was merely the means, not the cause of the transformation. The true driving force had been Rebecca's decision to fight for justice, even when everyone around her discouraged it. In occasional interviews she still gave, Rebecca always emphasized this lesson. "Many people think I was lucky to find those documents, but luck was only the beginning. The rest was work, persistence, and faith that the truth is always worth defending." Her story continued to inspire new generations. Schools in the region included the case in their civics education curricula, using it as an example of how ordinary people can make a difference when they fight for their rights. The Dorothy Mitchell Foundation helped over 500 families over the years, managing to recover more than 50 million reais in various reparations. Not all cases were as dramatic as Rebecca's, but they all represented important victories for families who thought they had lost their rights forever. The Foundation's work attracted national attention. Rebecca was invited to participate in human rights conferences in other cities and states. Her expertise in agrarian justice issues became an academic reference. Who would have thought a housekeeper from Newport would become a speaker at federal universities? Dr. Stephen would joke. "Life has these surprises," Rebecca would respond. "The important thing is to be ready to seize them when they appear." Rebecca's life philosophy had been shaped through the experience of struggle. She believed every person had the potential for much more than they imagined, needing only to find a cause worth defending. Emily followed her mother's example, but with the advantages of academic training and financial resources that Rebecca had not had. Her professional career flourished, but she always made time for volunteer work and social causes. The relationship between mother and daughter had deepened over the years of sharing the fight for justice. They were partners not only in family, but professionally and ideologically. "Sometimes I wonder if our life would have been simpler if I had never found those documents," Rebecca would occasionally reflect. "Perhaps simpler," Emily would reply. "But it wouldn't have been such a meaningful life. You made a difference in the lives of hundreds of people." It was true. Rebecca Mitchell's life had become complex and sometimes stressful due to the responsibilities she had taken on. But it had also become profoundly meaningful and rewarding. The old house where they had lived as tenants became a point of reference for contrast. Rebecca would occasionally pass by and remember the difficulties they faced back then. The current owner always greeted her with respect, knowing who she was and admiring her journey. "I remember when you lived here with the little girl," the woman said once. "I never imagined you would become so important in the city." "I didn't become important," Rebecca corrected. "I just discovered I had the ability to fight for justice. Anyone has that ability." Humility remained a defining characteristic of Rebecca, even after all the transformation and recognition she had achieved. When Emily announced her first pregnancy at 28, Rebecca was deeply moved. It would be the first time a child was born into the family with financial security and guaranteed prospects for the future. "What will you name the baby?" she asked during the dinner announcing the pregnancy. "If it's a girl, we want to name her Dorothy," Emily replied, "in honor of the great-grandmother who kept the documents so that one day justice could be done." "And if it's a boy?" "Margaret," said Emily's husband, "in honor of Mrs. Margaret, who had the wisdom to give the washing machine to the right person." The chosen names moved Rebecca. They represented the recognition that the entire family history was connected, from the original injustice suffered by Dorothy to the solidarity of Mrs. Margaret and Rebecca's fight for restitution. The baby was born a girl and was registered as Dorothy Margaret Mitchell Henderson. The full name honored the two women who had been fundamental to the family's transformation. Rebecca held her granddaughter for the first time with tears in her eyes, thinking of everything that had happened since that morning when she accepted an old washing machine. "She will grow up knowing it's possible to fight for justice and win," she whispered to the sleeping child. Emily watched the scene with emotion, seeing her mother in the role of grandmother and thinking about the continuity of the family story. "Mom, do you think one day I'll have to tell her about all the difficulties we went through?" I think so. It's important for her to know that the comfortable life she will have was earned through a lot of struggle, and that if she ever faces injustice, she has examples in the family of how to fight against it. The arrival of her granddaughter gave new purpose to Rebecca's life. Besides her work at the foundation and occasional lectures, she now had a new generation to educate and inspire. Dorothy Margaret grew up hearing stories about her great-grandmother Dorothy, who kept important documents, about Grandma Margaret, who knew when to reveal them, and about her grandmother Rebecca, who fought to bring justice. "Grandma, were you poor when you were little?" the girl asked at 5 years old. "I was, sweetheart. Very poor. But I discovered that being poor in money doesn't mean being poor in courage. And that's why you managed to become rich." "I didn't fight to become rich. I fought to bring justice. The money was a consequence, not the goal." The conversations with her granddaughter allowed Rebecca to reflect on her own journey and pass on important values to the new generation. The Dorothy Mitchell Foundation completed 10 years of operation with a big celebration in the community. Hundreds of people who had been helped by the organization attended to give thanks and celebrate. During her speech at the celebration, Rebecca looked at the diverse audience and was moved to see how many lives had been touched by the foundation's work. "When I found those documents in the washing machine, I only thought about getting justice for my family," she said. "I never imagined it would turn into a fight for justice for so many other families." Dr. Stephen Carter, now 80 years old, but still sharp and active, gave a speech about the importance of the foundation's work. "Rebecca proved that one determined person can do more for social justice than many institutions with abundant resources," he said. "Her story should be told and retold to inspire future generations." Emily announced during the party that she was pregnant again and that, regardless of the baby's gender, the name would be William, in honor of her great-grandfather William Henderson, whose property had been irregularly lost decades before. The choice of name completed the circle of family memory. All the main characters of the story would be honored in the new generation. Rebecca's second grandson was born healthy and became another source of joy and motivation for her. At 60, she felt fulfilled personally and professionally, with a united family and work that made a difference in the community. "Do you regret anything in your journey?" asked a journalist during an interview on the 20th anniversary of the discovery of the documents. "I only regret not having found the documents sooner," Rebecca answered. "I wonder how many other injustices could have been righted if we had started our fight years earlier." "And what advice would you give to people who discover they have rights similar to yours?" "Don't give up. Seek legal help, preserve documents, talk to older people who might have important information. And most importantly, don't be afraid to fight for justice even when it seems impossible." The interview was published in a national magazine and generated new interest in Rebecca's story. Publishers from other states sought rights to publish her book, and documentary producers were interested in adapting her story for film. "Would you agree to participate in a documentary?" Emily asked when she learned of the offers. "If it helped other people learn about their rights, yes," Rebecca replied, "but I don't want them to make a spectacle of our struggle." The documentary was produced with seriousness and respect for the story. It included interviews with Rebecca, Emily, Dr. Stephen Carter, Dr. Maurice Patterson, and several families that had been helped by the Dorothy Mitchell Foundation. When the documentary aired on national television, it generated significant repercussions. Dozens of people from across the country made contact, reporting similar cases and asking for guidance. The Dorothy Mitchell Foundation needed to expand its activities to meet the national demand. Emily organized a network of volunteer lawyers in different states to assist with cases in other regions. "Our small local fight has turned into a national cause," observed Rebecca. "And that's a good thing," Emily replied. "It means there are many more families needing justice than we imagined." The Foundation's expanded work brought new challenges, but also new satisfactions. Rebecca traveled to several states giving lectures and advising others on how to investigate and fight for their property rights. Her expertise became a national reference in matters of historical land regularization. Universities invited her as a visiting professor, and international organizations became interested in her working methodology. "Who would have thought an old washing machine would take us so far?" she joked with Emily during their travels. "It wasn't the washing machine that brought us here," her daughter always replied. "It was your courage to do something with what you found inside it." At 65, Rebecca decided to reduce her public activities and focus more on her role as a grandmother and advisor to the foundation. Emily took full leadership of the organization, but always consulted her mother on important decisions. The washing machine remained in the backyard, now surrounded by a small garden that Rebecca cultivated as a hobby. Dorothy Margaret, at 10 years old, helped care for the plants and always asked her grandmother to tell the story of the hidden documents again. "Grandma, do you think if I find an old washing machine I'll also find important documents?" the girl would ask. "Maybe yes, maybe no," Rebecca would reply. "What matters isn't finding documents, but knowing what to do when we find an injustice. And what should we do? Fight to correct it, even when everyone says it's impossible." Conversations with her granddaughter constantly reminded Rebecca that her story wasn't just about the past, but about values that should be passed to the future. William, at 7 years old, showed an early interest in matters of justice and rights. He would play toy lawyer and always argued that everyone should be treated fairly. "When I grow up, I'm going to help Mommy at the foundation," he would say. "Me too," Dorothy Margaret would add. "We'll continue Grandma's work." The prospect of the family continuing the work moved Rebecca deeply. Her individual struggle had transformed into a cause that transcended generations. Emily specialized further in agrarian law and became a university professor while maintaining her work at the foundation. Her courses always included the study of her own family's case as a practical example of fighting for rights. "Is it strange to teach about our own history?" Rebecca would occasionally ask. "At first it was," Emily would reply. "But now I understand our story has become public heritage. It's no longer just ours. It belongs to everyone who draws inspiration from it to fight for justice." Her daughter's maturity and analytical ability always impressed Rebecca. Emily had managed to combine academic training with practical experience exceptionally well. Dr. Stephen passed away at 85, leaving an important legacy in public defense and in the lives of all the families he had helped. Rebecca made sure to attend the wake and funeral, paying tribute to the man who had believed in her case when few did. "He was fundamental to our victory," she said during a speech at the wake. "Without his competence and dedication, our fight would not have succeeded." The loss of Dr. Stephen marked a phase in Rebecca's life. The time was coming to say goodbye to the people who had been important in her journey. Dr. Maurice retired as a state prosecutor and continued collaborating with the Dorothy Mitchell Foundation as an honorary consultant. His experience in complex investigations remained valuable for difficult cases. "Do you think we managed to achieve all the justice possible?" he asked during a foundation meeting. "We achieved a great deal of justice," Rebecca replied. "Perhaps not all we would have liked, but certainly much more than anyone thought possible at the beginning." The assessment was realistic. Not every case investigated by the foundation resulted in victories, but most families achieved at least clarification of their rights and guidance on how to proceed. The most important impact of the work had been cultural, creating awareness that ordinary people have the right to fight for justice and that persistence can overcome seemingly impossible obstacles. Rebecca began writing a second book, this time focused on the lessons learned during 25 years of work with social justice issues. She wanted to leave a practical handbook for future generations of activists. "This book will be more technical than the first," she explained to Emily. "I want to teach other people how to investigate property rights and how to organize fights for justice." "That's a good idea," her daughter agreed. "Your practical experience is worth more than many academic manuals." The second book took 3 years to complete. Rebecca Mitchell titled it Practical Manual for the Fight for Justice, Lessons from a Life Dedicated to Property Rights. The book was adopted by several universities as supplementary material in social law courses. Non-governmental organizations also used it to train activists and public interest lawyers. "You managed to transform your personal experience into public knowledge," commented a law professor during the launch. "That's what I wanted," replied Rebecca Mitchell. for other people to be able to learn from our successes and mistakes without having to go through the same difficulties. At 70 years old, Rebecca Mitchell was officially retired from public activities, but she was still sought out for occasional consultations in especially complex cases. Her home had become an informal reference center for social justice issues. Students, lawyers, activists, and families in situations similar to what she had faced continued to seek her guidance. Dorothy Margaret, at 15, showed a growing interest in the family history and began helping her grandmother organize documents and receive visitors. "Grandma, do you think I should study law like Mom?" "You can study anything you want, dear. What's important is that it's something that allows you to help other people." "I'm thinking of studying investigative journalism to uncover injustices like you uncovered great-grandmother Dorothy's." Her granddaughter's choice moved Rebecca Mitchell. It was a different but compatible way of fighting for social justice. William, at 12, already showed talent for leadership and organization. He helped his mother with foundation activities and always suggested improvements to procedures. "I think he's going to be an excellent administrator," commented Emily. "He has practical vision and organizational ability." "And a heart for social justice," added Rebecca Mitchell. "That's the most important combination." The Dorothy Mitchell Foundation completed 20 years of operation with a celebration even bigger than the 10-year one. The event brought together over 1,000 people who had been helped directly or indirectly by the organization. During her speech at the celebration, Rebecca Mitchell gave an emotional summary of the work done. "When I found those documents in the washing machine 30 years ago, I never imagined it would result in so many lives transformed. Our foundation has helped over 2,000 families clarify property issues. We recovered over 200 million reais in fair reparations. But most importantly, we helped people believe they have a right to justice." The applause was long and emotional. Many people in the audience owed their achievements to Rebecca Mitchell's pioneering work and the continuity provided by Emily. Emily announced during the celebration that the foundation had been recognized as a federal public utility organization, allowing it to receive government funds to expand its activities even further. "It's the official recognition that our work is important to society," she explained. "Now we'll be able to help even more families." The government recognition moved Rebecca Mitchell. It represented the institutional validation of a cause that had begun as a personal fight and transformed into a social movement. Dr. Maurice Patterson, now 80 years old, made a point of participating in the celebration and paying tribute to Rebecca Mitchell's work. "This woman proved that a casual discovery can change hundreds of lives when placed in the hands of someone determined to do justice," he said in his speech. Rebecca Mitchell is an example of how active citizenship can transform society. The tributes always made Rebecca Mitchell uncomfortable, but she had learned to accept them as recognition not only of her personal work, but of the importance of the cause she championed. That night at home, surrounded by family, Rebecca looked at the washing machine in the backyard and reflected on the entire journey that object had started. "Sometimes it still feels surreal," she commented to Emily. "An old machine that changed so many lives." "It wasn't the machine that changed, Mom," her daughter replied for the 1,000th time. "It was your decision to do something with what you found inside it." "I know, but I like to think that your great-grandmother Dorothy and Mrs. Margaret planned it all from above so things would happen exactly as they did." "Maybe they did," Emily agreed. "Maybe justice sometimes needs a little divine nudge to find its way." The conversation between mother and daughter summed up the entire philosophy that had guided their lives. The belief that justice is possible when determined people are willing to fight for it, even against seemingly impossible odds. End of story. And now, dear listeners, we have reached the end of this emotional journey of Rebecca Mitchell, who discovered that inside a simple old washing machine was hidden not only the truth about her family, but also her own inner strength. What a touching story, isn't it? Rebecca taught us that sometimes the most valuable gifts come disguised as things that seem worthless, and that the courage to fight for justice can transform not only our lives, but the lives of hundreds of others. Tell me in the comments, do you believe Mrs. Margaret really planned everything from the start? Or was it just a happy coincidence? And what would you have done in Rebecca's place? Accept the first money offer or fight to the end for the full truth? I'd love to know your opinions and personal experiences with situations of injustice. Please leave your sincere comments, share with us where you're watching from, and most importantly, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other emotional stories like this one.